Los Angeles is now entering its second week of fighting the largest fires the city has ever seen. The fires have already collectively burned an area more than 2.5 times the size of Manhattan, displacing more than 100,000 people and killing at least 25. So while those fires are still actively burning, while authorities are literally still searching burned out houses for the dead, how is the Republican leader of the House, Mike Johnson, how is he responding? He's threatening to hold hostage federal disaster aid.
I think there should probably be conditions on that aid. That's my personal view. We'll see what the consensus is. I haven't had a chance to socialize that with any of the members over the weekend because we've all been very busy, but it'll be part of the discussion for sure.
That was the Speaker of the House saying that federal aid for these wildfires in California should have conditions. Mind you, Speaker Johnson represents the disaster-prone state of Louisiana. And for the last year we have data, 2022, Louisiana received $34 billion more from the federal government than the state paid the federal government. In that same year, California paid $83 billion more to the federal government than the state got in return. 2022 isn't an anomaly. California is the 5th biggest economy in the world on its own. The state literally subsidizes the rest of this country year after year. But because California is a blue state, Republicans want it to have California bend to the will of the GOP in order to get disaster relief.
Do you expect, though, that Congress and Republicans will still help these Americans in need, even if they don't like their local politics and the party?
I expect that there will be strings attached to money that is ultimately approved.
We will certainly help those thousands of homes and families who have been devastated, but we also expect you to change bad behavior.
They don't deserve anything, to be honest with you, unless they show us they're going to make some changes.
Not to belabor the point here, but the Republicans you just heard there were Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, Representative Zach Nunn of Iowa, and Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. All representatives of red states that receive far more money from the federal government than they give the federal government. While, again, the blue state of California literally subsidizes their existence. Just last month, Congress allocated $100 billion in disaster relief to help the 6 states impacted by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. All but one of those states is led by a Republican governor, and that aid did not have conditions. Apparently, the moral calculus was very clear. But now that the blue state of California needs help, well, Republicans think disaster relief should be a bargaining chip.
Multiple times, Mr. Trump has threatened to withhold aid for California wildfires, both as president and now again as president-elect. Are you worried that he might actually do that?
Well, I mean, he's done it in Utah, he's done it in Michigan, did it in Puerto Rico. He did it to California back before I was even governor in 2018, until he found out folks in Orange County voted for him, and then he decided to give the money.
That was California Governor Gavin Newsom speaking about his fears that as of next week, his state's recovery will be in the hands of President-elect Donald Trump. House Speaker Mike Johnson and even some Republican members of California's own congressional delegation have signaled that they may demand conditions before sending any more relief money to California. Conditions that, at least according to Speaker Johnson, reportedly may include tying recovery money to one of Donald Trump's key political demands, raising the debt ceiling. Joining me now is Dan Pfeiffer, former White House senior advisor to President Obama and co-host of Pod Save America. Dan, thank you for being here. I have a lot of strategy questions to ask you because, I mean, first, what is the right response from Governor Newsom on down? I mean, when Republicans say you can't have money to rebuild your burned down city and help people find homes again unless you raise the debt ceiling, should they play ball?
Absolutely not. Look, let's start with how you respond to this. And that begins with pointing out very clearly and very forthrightly that what the Republicans are doing is they're playing politics with people's lives, right? California is a blue state, but there are 6 million people in this state who voted for Donald Trump. Those are the people they are denying aid to as well. And so we should call that out. We should point out that every other time strings have not been put on aid for states, because that is what we do in this country, because the fires may be in California, but the impact of that is felt across the country, just like with hurricanes in North Carolina and hurricanes in Florida. So we just have to call out what they're doing here. And then you get to the specific point of the debt ceiling, right? That is an absurd idea. I'm not sure that idea is going to fly. I don't know that the Freedom Caucus is going to fall for that. I don't think the Senate's going to fall for that, but we should call that out again, right? This is about people's lives. People need help now, and trying to use the lives and livelihoods of people suffering from one of the worst wildfires in this country's history to solve a political problem for Donald Trump is ridiculous. But we have to be vocal about that fact.
I'm with you. I mean, if past his prologue, Trump was convinced to release disaster aid when his aides pointed out, like, oh, Orange County was affected and they voted for you. But you now have members, as Politico is reporting, of California's Republican congressional delegation saying, yeah, no, you should tie disaster relief to a debt ceiling raise, or you should establish preconditions before you release the funds. I mean, it seems like Trump's and his allies, the misinformation they've been spinning about Democratic mismanagement of the state has caused even Republicans in the state to believe the lies enough so that they're willing to sort of sacrifice the immediate release of relief aid. I guess I wonder how much you think misinformation is giving Republicans a leg to stand on here. The suggestion that Governor Newsom didn't let enough water into the state because he was protecting Smelt Row or whatever, all of which Governor Newsom has set up a website to debunk. But like, how critical is that as a kind of foundational aspect to the denial of aid?
Well, misinformation is a huge problem. It's one that, as Mark Zuckerberg made clear the other day, it's going to get much worse as time goes on here. I think what is causing problems with these Republican members of Congress is as much as their attempt to be as loyal to Donald Trump as humanly possible, to be as obsequious to Donald Trump as humanly possible, as it is misinformation. So there are two issues here. There are strings on the aid, and then there's a debt ceiling. Let's put the debt ceiling aside for 1 second. What strings are they talking about? None of these people have mentioned them. They just keep saying strings. What is it they actually want? What do they think is going to help here? What is going to solve it? What is the problem they are trying to solve? We should push back on that and call that out. What are they actually talking about? Because there are answers to this, right? The smelt issue is an absurd issue. The water from Northern California doesn't go to Southern California. It's not where the water comes from. The reservoirs are full. There are answers to all these things, but we have to push the Republicans, specifically the Republican members of Congress from California, on what it is they're actually talking about here. So they're not just vomiting up talking points in the hope of getting invited to a White House reception in 2 weeks.
No comment on that, the vomit or the reception. But I wonder what you think the road ahead looks like for blue state governors, independent of, for this particular disaster in California, as Trump tries to use the federal government tries to weaponize the federal government to enact his political agenda. If you're a blue state governor and Trump wants to conduct federal mass deportation or workplace raids in your state and you want to stand against it, but you also need help from the federal government, or at least cooperation on urgent matters, whether it's disaster aid or something like that, is there a calibration? Is there a choreography here? Can you do both? Can you both be an adversary to Trump and serve your state in a time of need? Do you think such a thing is possible, knowing what you know about Donald Trump?
It's a tricky balancing act, and Governor Newsom's in a very challenging position here. He has been aggressive about pushing back on some of the misinformation, for calling out, as in the clip you played, the previous time Donald Trump has played politics with disaster aid. But he also has Trump coming to his state next week. And he knows that, unlike in any previous presidency, other than Trump's previous one, politics are going to play a role here. And you have to sort of walk that fine line. Ultimately, I think Democrats cannot, avoid calling out Trump for what he is doing when it's wrong, right? You have to do your politics. We saw a lot of people doing this during COVID, unfortunately, about whether you're going to get PPE or masks or whatever else from the federal government when Trump was president. But you're going to have to walk a fine line. One thing I think Democratic governors can do here, I think Newsom has done a pretty good job of this, is in times of crisis, when there is misinformation flying at you at all times, the way to respond to that is to over-communicate, to be out all the time, as much press as you possibly can, to grab every single microphone and bullhorn you can find and shout out the truth. It's not always going to work. There are going to be people who have motivated reasoning to believe what they want to believe. You have members of Congress who will say what will get them in good favor with Trump, but be out there all the time. Newsom's done a very good job of that. I think some other California officials, particularly down in LA, have done a less good job of that. But that is the model for how you communicate, especially when you have a president of the United States who is using his microphone, or an incoming president of the United States, to push that very same misinformation.
Everything, everywhere, all at once. That's the new playbook, both sides of the aisle. Dan Pfeiffer, thank you for joining me tonight, my friend. Appreciate you.
Thank you.